time for the final word in sports all across the state. You're listening to Sports Talk with your hosts, Phil Kornbluth, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. You've been waiting all day, so join the show now by calling 800-956-7266.
You're not allowed to talk anymore before the show. You're just not allowed to talk anymore because you just get me screwed up the last 2 days.
Yeah, I'm just trying to break you up.
It's fine because you know I come in here all tight and wound, and now all you're trying to do is get me off the scheme a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports Talk South Carolina Radio Network on this Thursday, the 12th day of July, 2018. Chatting about the world of Palmetto State sports. 800-956-7266 is your two-way Sports Talk telephone number on this Thursday. Phil Kornbluth once again not with us, dearly departed, although not departed for long. He'll be back with us on Monday, where we will be live from SEC Media Days, covering South Carolina and all the schools inside the Southeastern Conference. We hear a certain balding sports reporter / talk show host will also be there from the state of Alabama. And of course, he'll be re-signed by that time, according to multiple media reports. So according to Dan Wolkin, now the biggest story in the SEC has actually been secured, and Paul Feinbaum can be okay for everybody else to look at some of the actual on-the-field stuff to talk about inside the SEC. It's funny, we were talking earlier. He had very big prognosticator Danny Sheridan on today, and he said some very nice things about Clemson and some not nice things about South Carolina. He said that he believes that Clemson, Alabama, Washington, and Penn State is his college football playoff, and he believes that the national champion will be the Clemson Tigers for the second time in 3 years. As for South Carolina, he sees them having no more than 7 wins. He doesn't see them beating Clemson or Georgia, and believes that at least 2 more losses can be in that reign. He says that he doesn't necessarily think that South Carolina will come within 14 points of the Georgia Bulldogs week 2 at Williams-Brice Stadium. He said, realistically, on paper, Georgia should beat them by double digits. I say to you, Pro, that's poppycock, in my opinion, because I think that game is going to be a lot closer.
Well, the one thing I would like to ask a person is, give me some bones of why you think that.
Right.
Are those 2 senior running backs there?
No.
Isn't about 6 or 7 starters off the Georgia defense gone?
6 of them, in fact.
Yes.
Gone.
They
lost 35 Letterman.
Now, if
35. That's a lot.
If we would have flipped this switch, Danny Sheridan, well, South Carolina, they won't beat Georgia because they lost 6 defensive players. Those 2 big running backs they had last year are gone. But when it's Georgia, they think they're going to reload. Last time I checked, their coach has been there 1 year. Everybody says, well, they had the #1 recruiting class. What was that? What does that mean? I'm like, who was the coach that said that? I think it was Tom Landry who said, yeah, you got a lot of great prospects you drafted. He said, no. We refer to them as suspects until they get on the field and I see what they can do in our game plan. We think they can do things, but until we get them on the field and I can say something about them, they're suspects.
Listen, there's one thing that I've learned in the relatively short time that I've been here, and granted, I'm not necessarily new anymore, but I do still have trouble subscribing to this maniacal heavy recruiting theory that we obsess over guys who have yet to take the field. And I'm of the mindset, listen, you got to show me. I come from a show me background. You got to show me that you can play at this level. Fact of the matter is, South Carolina has 8 guys back on offense, 6 guys back on defense from a group that went into their building. And it was a 2-score game in the 4th quarter. And it was a lot closer than the final score indicated with their 24-10 loss last year in Sanford Stadium between the hedges. I personally think South Carolina has a better than even chance to beat Georgia, not only because of the fact that you get them at home, you get them early in the season when they're still trying to figure things out. And oh, by the way, you have South Carolina playing Coastal Carolina in the opening week. You have Georgia playing Austin Peay in the opening week. And you know what's going to happen, Pro. They're going to burn the red shirt of Justin Fields in week 1. And what's all anybody going to be talking about in Athens and Atlanta week 2? Well, I mean, Justin Fields, he came out and he threw a bunch of long passes down the sideline. And you know what? I think he should be the starting quarterback, not Jake Fromm, because the same stuff happened last year with Jacob Eason after Eason went down. And they said, oh, well, this is the actual heir apparent, Jake Fromm is. But then all of a sudden, Justin Fields comes in here and he's the hot young thing. This is so stupid. Like, why are we getting so enamored with guys who have not even taken the field yet?
Well, that's
Clemson and Trevor Lawrence, same thing.
That's because it's gone to the point where now you got to be the flavor of the week, the flavor of the month, and everybody has attention deficit disorder, including football fans.
Yes,
it's the next best thing that has to happen. One of the things I am seeing, and I noticed this, is the fact that people cannot. Some writers are doing it, some writers aren't. But most writers that I've heard from and national pundits I've heard from aren't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't, with gnashing of teeth, they can't say that Will Muschamp is doing a good job at South Carolina because they still got Florida in their heads. They can't figure out that a coach can succeed at South Carolina. Well, why in the heck could he not succeed at Florida? Some things happen that way. As I said before, the musical chairs, and I think he learned as a head coach here, and which is why he pulled the trigger on maybe some a guy that's is a neophyte at it. That's why he hired a quarterbacks coach with about as much experience as Yoda.
I said, Dan Warner's been around a while.
Yeah. No one at Florida could have done anything with their offense when you kept playing musical chairs with the offensive coordinator's position. How in the world can you pull that off? He was destined to fail, especially offensively, because of what he did there. And I think he learned from that. The other key is they were in every football game at Florida for the most part because of that defense. And when he left, they took advantage of winning a couple of Eastern Division titles because he left a bevy of defensive players behind.
Well, here's the other part of this, and we talked about this after Kurt Roper got fired and the search was going on. As somebody who is a defensive-minded coach who really wants nothing to do with the offensive side of the football, that means you have to hire somebody who is almost head coach quality when it comes to, you almost have to hire a second head coach to be your offensive coordinator, which is why I initially wasn't the biggest fan of the Brian McClendon hire. But what I do say is that I like that he is taking a different approach than the previous regime and not just saying, oh, well, this is the same players. We can do this, with a couple of different tweaks. No, they completely tore the whole darn thing down. And they're saying they're going to run with tempo. They're going to make things happen differently. And in my mind, part of that we saw during the spring game. They didn't show the whole darn thing because that's not what you do in the spring. You try to shield your cards about as much as possible. But it's hard to imagine us seeing something remarkably the same to the Gamecock offense this year, because if it is the same, then guess what? Heads are going to roll, because Will Muschamp knows he has to get this offensive coordinator search position right, because he's never gotten it right in his time in either South Carolina or at Florida. So in my mind, he knew that if he was going to go to somebody who was either a promotion from within or somebody of the same vein as Kurt Roper, he knew they were going to have to take a long look inside themselves in the way they do things. And I think that they did that.
And of course, one of the things people argue, and to some degree I would argue with you, if number one doesn't get hurt, we may not be having this conversation.
Exactly. Or number 5, or half the offensive line, or,
things happen.
Clemson has its non-conference basketball released, and a big update on a USC basketball target.
This is the place to talk Tigers, Gamecocks, and more. Sports talk across the state on the South Carolina Radio Network.
Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. Willie P. and the Professor here with you. Clemson has released its non-conference basketball schedule, and the thing that stands out to me, Professor, is that not only will Clemson not play a true road game until the ACC season outside of the state of South Carolina, but their only true road game will be at South Carolina at Colonial Life Arena, where they won 2 years ago. Now, I find it funny how Frank Martin said this about that rivalry last year, about how they don't get any credit for playing Clemson. Clemson doesn't get any credit for playing them because it is an ACC versus SEC. And the fact that Clemson will play up to 3 SEC schools in the non-conference. They get Mississippi State, a neutral site contest in Newark, New Jersey, which is about as neutral as you can get because there's really no geographic connection to either school there, Ben Howland or Brad Brownell in that regard. And you could possibly see Georgia in the Cayman Islands, which is probably the only place you'd ever want to see Georgia is in the Cayman Islands. And the other non-conference game, bigly of note, is the Nebraska home contest, part of the ACC Big Ten Challenge. They do get Radford at home as well on the 15th of December. That's another NCAA tournament team as the Big South champion. But outside of that, Citadel, North Carolina Central, Sam Houston State, St. Peter's, Charleston Southern, Lipscomb. I know you're like the Lipscomb matchup, but at the same time, I look at this as a very conservative non-conference schedule put together by Brad Brownell. Maybe it's because of the fact that, you lost Gabe DeVoe. You're trying to develop some new talent. And also, you can't underlook the fact that you're playing in a conference that every year is going to look like it does in the ACC. It's not like they're in for the kind of down year that they had last year, I think. Because I think people were down on the ACC a lot last year. And, we heard that narrative spun throughout the entire season. And yet, by the end of it, people were singing the praises of those, including Clemson.
Well, the thing about Clemson, I think it's great to go up to Newark because you've made the Sweet 16 last year. And I still have the contention that if done right, a basketball team should be able in some quarters of talking about outside its region, of being able to at least attract an athlete to look at a school while riding the coattails of the success of your football team. I don't see any problem with doing that. And I think people know where Clemson is now.
Of course.
Several years ago, some people thought Clemson was sitting in North Carolina
or Georgia,
and suddenly, it's in South Carolina. You know where the foothills are now.
Yeah.
You know about the upstate. They all know that now. So Brad Brownell, I think you have to strike while the iron is hot. The only thing I really have been wanting Clemson to do for years, and they had to do it out of necessity because they were remodeling Little John, is I thought a huge non-conference tilt with somebody in the Bon Secours Arena in Greenville every year was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to go to the Cayman Islands, if you're going to go to Newark, by all means go down to Greenville, please, and play a game because they were successful in that arena. And I think you cultivate some of the fringe fans that you may have who may not drive to Clemson, but will come into Greenville and see you play.
And that's the other part of this too, is that, Florida does this with their Orange Bowl Classic. They play that in Sunrise. Clemson played in that last year. We see other schools who have a regional base arena, if you will, or an arena that is of NCAA tournament level hosting quality, playing games like there. The Texas schools do it with Dallas and Houston, both of them, and even some degree as well. You have the DC schools who do the same thing with the Verizon Center, even though Georgetown uses it as its home arena. So again, you see, and of course the Garden in New York gets the same kind of treatment. Right. So in my mind, being able to use that arena is a good thing. My only question is you're going to have Gamecock fans on the other side who want the same kind of juice. And I'm wondering if if maybe they feel like if they give it to one, they have to give it to all. Because I from what I understand, it's hard getting in that building because of the events that they have there. Not that they necessarily have a primary tenant outside the hockey team, but I mean it's a hard book, if you will.
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think probably for Clemson, I'm just thinking specifically of Clemson. If you got an asset nearby, why not use it?
I understand. I'm not saying you're wrong. We could be getting a decision here within the next day or two about Juwan Gary. He told Lou Bezjak of the State newspaper that he plans to announce his commitment either on Saturday or Sunday. It is believed that Clemson, USC, Alabama, all still involved, including also a couple of schools, Virginia Tech and NC State on the periphery. Many believe that this is a USC versus Alabama fight, although it has been kind of the conjecture among the insiders. There's been some people who have been saying things about his personal life and a situation involving people around him who might be going to Alabama, possibly his girlfriend going to a school in Alabama. Again, I'm not certain that any of that information is true. That's some of the stuff that's been substantiated. I know Kerry Richards says some of those things as well. Many believe that Alabama is the strong lean, not just because of that, but because of also the fact that he had said that USC had kind of backed off a little bit. And, of course, that has caused Avery Johnson and the Crimson Tide to put on the, pardon the pun, full-court press.
Yeah, it's interesting how when a South Carolina and in some instances a Clemson guy that they've been chasing suddenly says they've cooled on him. Mm-hmm. It's almost like an out for them to say, this is why I'm going somewhere else. The key point is I'm looking at personnel.
Right.
In my opinion is South Carolina has brought in one grad transfer point guard, but they brought in a slew of guards who pretty much are in the same mold or play in the same position as a Juwan Gary.
Mm-hmm.
They would love to have him. They put a year, 2 years in his recruiting. And I'm not so certain that he doesn't look at the roster and say, well, and I have not, and I'll be honest and say I have not looked at Alabama's roster, but I don't know what Alabama is looking for and say maybe a hybrid wing guard position. And maybe he sees more room at the end there than he does at South Carolina.
Korn last talked with him in June. And basically, according to what he had told Korn, he said he had heard from Clemson very recently. South Carolina haven't heard from them that much anymore. Last time we talked was a couple of weeks ago. He talked to Bruce Shingler and Frank Martin. So, again, in my mind, maybe Frank feels like they're okay at that position. But, again, this is going to start all the people talking about, oh, well, another in-state guy goes by the wayside. They don't lock up the borders. What's going on with Frank Martin? People act like South Carolina is this freaking nectar of college basketball talent. Look at the guys who are not playing.
Well, if I'm a coach, this is what I'm looking at. If I got several guys at the position that a player plays, you have Trey Hannibal already committed.
Yes.
That means, in my mind, if everyone sticks and everybody knows that may or may not be true this time, you only have 2 scholarships left.
Right.
Last time I checked, you got a bunch of young guards.
Mm-hmm.
However, this is Silva's last year.
Right.
Mike Kotsar will be a senior.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some promising youngsters, but they haven't shown the lightning has struck yet, including a freshman coming in.
And
that makes me think that if you got 2 scholarships, you better be looking at some big men.
I say Malcolm Wilson of Ridgeview would fit in that vein very much. Don't know if Christian Brown fits that bill as well, but like you said, they are very guard heavy. Frank Martin likes his guards. We'll see if that materializes. We'll talk with Sports Illustrated college football writer Joe Neeson on a very interesting project she and the folks at SI are working on. Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network on this Thursday. We are inching closer and closer to college football, and Sports Illustrated, as a result of getting ready for college football and commemorating its past, is doing a series called the BCS at 20, and a lot of their reporting has looked at kind of the change in how we determine the college football champion. Of course, the BCS, revolutionary at the time. The college football playoff has, of course, succeeded it, and Joan Neeson did a story on basically talking to those inside the computer polls, and she joins us now here on Sports Talk. Joan, I guess what was the biggest revelation in this particular part of your entity's reporting?
You know, the biggest revelation to me was almost just how entertaining these guys are. You think they're the guys behind the computer polls, and the computers were always sort of portrayed as these, personality lists, super objective, which obviously they are, but the guys behind them are such interesting, smart guys who have such, varying opinions. So it was fun to sort of talk to them and just see how their opinions on, everything related to the BCS really ran the gamut.
I bet Sagarin was a fun guy to talk to.
He was. I talked to him. I was in the car driving back from another work trip and talked to him over the course of that drive. I think we had 3 separate phone calls because he kept thinking of things he wanted to tell me that he'd forgotten to say in the prior phone call. Just has such a passion for everything he does. And they honestly, all the guys were that way. It wasn't that it was just Sagarin. I mean, every single guy I talked to is such a fan of college football and of just the whole ranking process.
Is it your opinion that, it's funny that the computers kind of turned almost into a targeted pariah as the BCS kind of waned and people's popularity of it? I think that, people like the human polls, but, the computers kind of were an unfair target in my mind. What do you think the role is of the computer rankings, and especially now how we determine the championship now with obviously a face-driven committee?
It's a really good question. And one of the guys I spoke to, I believe it was Wes Colley, who his rankings were in there from 2002 on. He made a very good point about the fact that he thought the computers back in the BCS days always had a little more pull than just their 1/3 that they were, numerically given, because they had such prominence. Everyone consulted them. They were part of the rankings, which meant the people who were involved in the human polls were probably consuming those computer rankings a little bit more and allowing them to inform their opinions. And I think that's a very good point. And I think that's obviously still the case. It's not like the committee today is sitting around just coming up with, their opinions out of nowhere, or like they're watching every single game and all of their opinions are based on, what they've broken down watching games. We know that's not the case. But I do think the fact that the computers were maligned and now don't have that platform anymore. These guys are all still doing their computer rankings. They just don't have quite the same platform. I think that does sort of give them less of a pull with the humans, which I don't think is a great thing. I think we should be considering what these computers are saying.
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about this particular issue on the show this week, Joan, about how, a lot of times the human rankings have these almost kind of personal biases involved, and almost kind of each team almost kind of has some baggage that they carry with them that might be as old as 20 or 30 years old. I mean, heck, Missouri probably still carries some baggage from the 5th down game and the flea kicker game, and Clemson, even until they won the national championship, had to carry the moniker of a team that always had a peculiar looking loss near the end of the year.
Definitely. And I think it's true. I think that there is something to be said for just the fact that the computers, there is no level of subjectivity. It is objective. One of the guys I talked to, Ken Massey, he said something to the effect of, with the computers, Condoleezza Rice didn't have to stand up on TV and explain the rankings. And I thought that was a very funny way to put it, but it really hits to the core of it, is the computers don't have to defend themselves. You know the formula, or some approximation of the formula that's being used, and this is what they spit out.
It certainly is something interesting, and in my mind, that is the imperfect nature of this whole thing. As we're talking with Joan Neeson, Sports Illustrated, the series is called BCS at 20. There are a lot of other great articles that have come about as a result of this reporting, and just looking at the way we determine the top 4 teams now, I almost feel like if the BCS had allowed for more of the games to be played, as far as, instead of just determining a 1 and a 2, maybe you determining, a 4-team playoff via the BCS, why was that not something that was, I guess, sought out by the folks who wanted to make this drastic change for the college football playoff a couple of years ago?
I don't have a great answer for you there. I don't think we necessarily know why, apart from just sort of the fact that the polls were so maligned and the BCS was so maligned by the end that, it was kind of like, let's just kick the baby out with the bathwater, which is what one of the computer guys said to me. And I think that's a good point. They wanted to get rid of the BCS, and in the process, the computers kind of got swept up with it. I said earlier, the guys had such, a variety of opinions on nearly every subject related to the BCS. The one thing that all of these computer pollsters really agreed on was the fact that they didn't understand why the BCS rankings weren't used to rank a 4-team playoff. Pretty much to a man, they said the BCS was, in essence, a 2-team playoff, which is insufficient. So why not just make it a 4-team playoff? So sometimes I think when we're in the thick of it and these changes, we always think the next best thing is going to solve all of, whatever sports problems. And at the time, maybe we all thought, this college football playoff is going to solve the problem, and you get so mired in the change that you forget to pull sort of what does make sense from the current situation. And of course, the grass is always greener.
Talking with Joe Neeson, Sports Illustrated college football reporter. You wrote a piece recently about the 5 impact freshmen who can make an instant impact this fall, and I found it interesting because there are 2 freshmen of very close import here, not just at Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, but also at Georgia with Fields, the quarterback there. It's funny, we're seeing a lot more of these quarterbacks kind of get almost sort of an NFL feel about them, kind of teams wanting the instant gratification because they know they're only going to get 3 years of a guy. Is that dangerous for the game as far as, guys who are incumbents kind of having to look over their shoulder because the next hot young quarterback is waiting in the wings?
It is a really fascinating thing that we've seen over the last few seasons. And I don't want to say it's dangerous necessarily. I do think it's something that needs to be kept in check in a way. Similar to what we were talking about just a second ago, the grass is always greener. And I think in order to really have a successful quarterback, you have to invest in a guy and give him at some point some vote of confidence. And when that vote of confidence is always sort of shaky or not, 100% there, I think that does make things tricky. And the fact that when I was compiling this list, first of all, it's hard to narrow it down to 5 guys, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Sure.
When I'm sitting there with this list and I have quarterback after quarterback on here as freshmen, I was sitting there compiling this thinking, well, this is something, this is interesting. It's just the fact that there are so many guys who really could make such a difference as freshmen it's fun, but it's got to take a step back and think, wow, this doesn't always happen.
Of course, people are looking at Georgia, as I mentioned there, with Fields and Fromm, and obviously having to replace all that on defense. They come to South Carolina in week 2, and people are looking at that game and circling it on their schedule. What other games are circled on your schedule as you kind of start to get ready here as we sit about a month and a half away?
I am so far out of the college football, even looking at the season right now, that is a great question. I don't even know. If people would ask me, where do you think you're going to be early in the season? And I don't have games necessarily scheduled yet, but I do think that Michigan-Notre Dame matchup is a fun one that I am looking forward to, in week 1. That game, to me, it's 2 teams that obviously weren't in it to the level of a Georgia or a Clemson last year, but 2 teams that are always sort of right there. And it's such a fun rivalry game to have that early next year. That's one that I'm very excited to watch. I was just chatting with a friend about that, and I don't know why, but that one to me is one that I think might have, some repercussions down the line.
Certainly, Harbaugh and there's no love lost there with those 2.
No. And yeah, it's beyond that. I don't tend to really lock into figuring out what games I really want to watch until I get to media days time. And I've been working on the golf beat a lot lately. So it's funny. This season is really sneaking up on me in almost a nice way that I don't feel like I'm overthinking too much yet. So it's going to be fun. I'm going to Big Ten media days here in a couple weeks. And then it's like, oh gosh, I got to really start thinking about this, don't I?
Certainly so. Well, we hope to see you down the line somewhere across our footprint. Appreciate the time as always, and enjoyed the article.
Thanks for having me.
That's Joe Neeson of Sports Illustrated, back with recruiting and more next on Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network.
Now back to Sports Talk, South Carolina's most listened to sports talk show for more than 30 years.
Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. You know, for those of you who set your watch by recruiting, we will have it in this segment. Thank you.
No, but the thing is that we've had some people getting cross-referenced on the wrong sport for whatever. So you were talking about road games because we were talking about Clemson's non-conference basketball schedule.
We had a couple people who were saying, does Texas A&M not count as a true road game? And I said we were talking about basketball, Clemson basketball, because some Clemson fans think that they only play two sports at Clemson, football and not football. But it's okay. I know that they're all not like that.
Recruiting is in there too. That's a sport.
That's a sport, and spring football is a separate sport. So maybe it's like 5 sports. But again, anyway, we're talking about Clemson's. Like this is the thing. Like, do you really think that I'm going to tweet that out as if we don't know Clemson's football schedule by heart? Like, honestly, I've gone down the schedules of both South Carolina and Clemson verbatim for the past 5 months. Okay, so like, don't try to catch me napping over here, you guys.
Do they play them in basketball this year? No.
A&M? No, they do not. They do play 2 other SEC schools and possibly a third in their basketball non-conference.
Well, this is rare for Clemson. Schedule. Clemson usually plays about, if you count South Carolina, at least 3 SEC teams every year. But this is the first time I've seen it where they will play all 3 SEC teams away from Little John.
Very interesting. Very interesting situation, and maybe that helps their RPI to get those games away. Maybe we'll see if that ends up playing itself out. To recruiting, we already told you about what's going on with Juwan Gary. He's told the state newspaper that he plans to make his announcement on either Saturday or Sunday following the Peach Jam tournament in North Augusta. He is basically played 2 games already, split the first 2, plays his 3rd game tonight. He's down to a final 5 of USC, Clemson, Alabama, Virginia Tech, and NC State. Many believe this is a 2-horse race between the Elephants and the Gamecocks, and those who believe that also think that the Elephants have the upper hand when it comes to Alabama.
Oh, the upper trunk is this.
Upper trunk, yeah. There you are. Speaking of basketball, though, Josiah James says that he is focused more on the games and not the recruiting decision. He's also at the Peach Jam in North Augusta. The 6'6" Porter Gowd high school student also has trips to Greensboro, North Carolina, and Orlando still in his summer ball future. He says that he's basically got a list of 9. USC and Clemson are on it, as are Kansas, Michigan State, and Duke, among others. Won't read the whole list. He says his list is a mixture of power conference in-state schools, some blue blood programs, and also some programs that are on the rise. He says he's enjoyed the fact that he's been recruited by both of the big in-state schools. Both schools are quality, and both the coaching staffs are quality, and they've shown him how much he means to their program. He definitely believes that those 2 schools are in the mix. He says he's not necessarily ready to lead a Final 5 to talk about official visits, but he says he has done some unofficials, and they could schedule some more just so he can see more than just his Final 5. Speculation's been running strong this week regarding offensive lineman Warren McClendon of Brunswick, Georgia. Will it be USC, Georgia this week, sometime in the future? Well, he talked to Korn on Wednesday night, saying that he's going to wait a couple of weeks and basically saying he's going to leave for vacation with his family. So he's going to at least take some time off and reflect here. He said he was about 90% of this decision earlier in the week, but Wednesday he informed us that his percentage has dropped. Of course, his cousin is Gamecock offensive coordinator Brian McClendon, but because of that connection, there's also connections with Georgia because of McClendon's time as a player there. He's also talked to Florida as well. He's going to go to Cancun for his vacation, jealous, and he'll be gone most of the rest of July, and thus would not be able to attend recruiting events at USC and Georgia at the end of the month. He still says he wants to visit all 4 of his final schools, USC, Georgia, Auburn, and Tennessee, before finalizing his decision. I wonder if there'll be a bench press in Cancun.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Brian McClendon's brother is a grad student at Carolina as well.
So there you go.
So they got a lot. And, of course, his dad was, I think, an offensive player of the year in the SEC when he played running back, Willie McClendon.
All
years ago.
very big potential situations there. Another one in the Palmetto State goes by the dust and will stay in the ACC. Dillon defensive end Shamar McCollum committed Wednesday night to Wake Forest. Also had reported offers from Oregon, North Carolina, as well as Arkansas, Missouri, Coastal Carolina, in-state, Appalachian State as well. Both USC and Clemson had interest in him through camps but did not offer. Tackled 97 last year, 40 tackles for loss. He is actually the third Palmetto State commitment going to the Demon Deacons. The others are Kendrell Flowers, running back out of Irmo, and defensive back Jalen Mahoney of South Point. Athlete DJ Chisholm of Berkeley announced a commitment yesterday to East Carolina, and Clemson's in the final 11 with safety Brendan Gant of Lakeland, Florida, who cut his list down Wednesday. Florida, Florida State, Alabama, Georgia, just some of the names on that list. He was once an Alabama commit, so one wonders whether or not that will stay in the offing as well. Again, Brendan Gant of Lakeland, Florida, still considering Clemson. That is recruiting for this Thursday. Make sure to check it out on our website, sportstalksc.com, on Twitter at sportstalksc. Use the hashtag STRecruiting.
And some people, for some kids, a school like Wake Forest is just what the doctor ordered. If I'm not mistaken, I think they still are the smallest institution that plays big-time Division I football, I think, it is Wake Forest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a nice campus. You ever been there? It's
I have.
Quiet.
I have. Very nice.
Very nice. You could understand that some of the kids like the fact that the classes have to be low as far as the size.
Seems it's like very secluded, almost like a retreat atmosphere.
Yes, it is.
Very much so. 800-956-7266. Let's go to Glenn, who's calling in North Charleston. Glenn, you're on Sports Talk. Good evening, sir.
How you doing, Mr. Will?
What's happening?
Not much. And the guy that said 7 wins for South Carolina, I got a feeling that the specialty teams, too, is not thinking straight because Deebo Samuels will gradually come back, and he's got real talent of looking down the field at the holes that would be open way before he gets to them and be able to score. I hope he continues to run the 100 yards back like he did last two seasons. And
that's the thing. If I was anybody worth my salt, I wouldn't be kicking anywhere near Deebo Samuel after seeing the first 2 weeks of last year. That's my only concern. My concern is whether or not he's going to get any reps to be able to make it happen. Guys kicking it out of the back of the end zone.
I'll tell you, has the best chance to run kickoffs back for South Carolina.
The up man.
If they got another stud, they put back there because they're going to kick it to him or they kick it to Deebo. The special teams coach at some institutions will be fired. If they kick it over there to Deebo.
I would say, he might have a chance to take one back. No offense to Joe Moglia in Coastal Carolina, but he might be able to take one back against the Chanticleers. I think Kirby Smart would rather have him kick it out of bounds rather than have Deebo
Now, here's
Samuel.
the other question I'd like to ask you. If you got a guy who is a linchpin of your offense, aren't you desperately looking for another return guy? And I'm not putting Deebo out there.
I think he's so important to their game, getting the ball with him in the open field, that they're willing to take that risk.
Because I know I can almost see what's going to happen now. They're going to line two people up, maybe on the same yard marker, or maybe, kind of catty corner.
That's what you got to do.
And
you got to hide him somewhere.
Then at the last minute, they both cross the field.
Yeah, they got to hide him somewhere. So I've been looking forward to our next interview for quite a while. We've been doing these previews and recaps of spring. We're going to talk Florida Gator football. Chomp, chomp. With Robbie Andrew of the Gainesville Sun. The school that is getting all the love in the SEC East that's not named South Carolina or Georgia.
They got the quarterback whisperer.
I want to know from Robbie if he's seen Dan Mullen's pixie dust and if he's seen him use it. I wonder if they keep that behind closed doors, if they're selling it along with the Gatorade at the Swamp. Can you buy the pixie dust?
No, you can only scrape it up at the beach over there at Biloxi.
Maybe you can put it on my gator teeth and see them come to life too. We'll talk Gator football next.
This is an
Round 2 of Sports Talk up next with your hosts Phil Kornblut, Will Pelagic, and the Professor Tom Hayes. Don't leave us hanging. Join the show. 800-956-7266.
Welcome in, Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network on this Thursday, the 12th day of July, 2018. Along with Professor Tom Hayes, yours truly, Will Pelagic. Phil Kornblut returns to us on Monday, where we will be at SEC Media Days covering what's going on with South Carolina and the rest of its SEC participants. Next week as well, we will be at ACC Media Kickoff in Charlotte. Also, Dabo Sweeney's annual golf tournament, which will take place at the reserve at Lake Kiowee, as it always does. We'll have that for you Tuesday, and then the media event Wednesday, Thursday in Charlotte. So plenty to be enthused about with football right around the corner. We're continuing our look at the opponents on the Gamecocks and Clemson schedule. And it's our pleasure to welcome in on the Florida beat from the Gainesville Sun and Gatorsports.com, Robbie Andrew, who joins us here on Sports Talk. Robbie, what's going on? How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
No problem, Robbie. I'm just going to get right to it. Florida is getting a lot of love, and I kind of need to know why. Are you with these people who think that Dan Mullen is basically meaning an immediate rebuild and an immediate rechange of the philosophy for Florida, or do you think it's going to be a much longer process?
Well, I don't think it's going to be immediate. I think there's going to be, a turnaround of some sort this year, because that was not a 4-7 team last year in terms of talent. If you look at it in the way they lost some of those games and, losing all those players to suspensions and then losing the coach there at the end, playing those games with an interim coach. But I think with Florida, it comes down to what it always does. And it's, are you going to get good quarterback play? If you do, there will be a turnaround. But if the quarterback play is status quo, then, it's not going to be a dramatic turnaround, because it's, quarterback play is what has kind of been Florida's downfall here since Tebow left. So, Mullen's a quarterback whisperer, but you have to question these guys who have not really done it before in the past. Can he get them to perform at a high level, which we haven't seen yet? So to me, there's talent around the quarterback position, but the quarterback position, if it's mediocre, your team's going to be mediocre.
I was going to say, that leads me to my my standing point. He's had the quarterback whisperer moniker put on him, has Dan Mullen. Of course, Dak Prescott, Nick Fitzgerald notwithstanding. At Mississippi State, Felipe Franks, I don't think is either of those two put together. In my mind, I'm wondering what exactly he has in store for Franks. What, if anything, can you at least add to what you saw from him and what you've seen from Mullen as he's kind of taken this quarterback room by the reins here?
Yeah, well, I think what Mullen sees in Franks is a big, strong, athletic guy with a tremendous arm. I mean, an unbelievable arm. You look at that Tennessee game last year, the last throw that he threw there was pretty remarkable. And, he showed that in the spring some. But the big question with Franks is what goes on between his ears, because he has not been good reading defenses. He can't find the open guy, it seems like. And when he does find the guy, he has a problem with accuracy. So I think Mullen sees a guy with great raw talent and potential, but, so far we haven't seen it in terms of production on the field yet. But I think that's what he sees. And Frank's a guy that, if you work with him, you get him thinking the right way, you dumb down the game a little bit for him, that, you've got a guy that could, maybe be successful and help you get things turned around quick.
Yeah, for the most part, if Florida does not turn the football over and leave them in dire straits, the most consistent part of Florida during these quarterback troubles has been their defense. And of course, when Will Muschamp was let go, he still had a lot of his talent still sitting there in the cupboard at Florida. As far as the defensive line, it looks like it's still solid. The back seven, especially the secondary, do they have enough to reload that defense next year?
Well, I think they've got two potential elite corners, and Marco Wilson and C.J. Henderson, who both started as true freshmen last year and more than held their own back there. I think that cornerbacks, they're matching up with a DBU reputation. I think the question mark back there is you've got safeties who are pretty talented to play a little bit, not a whole lot. So there's a little bit of the unknown there, and then. To me, the next question when you look at that defense is the starting linebackers could be really good, but the guys behind them haven't played much either. So, there are some question marks on defense, too, in terms of how the safeties are going to play and whether they can stay healthy at linebacker.
Robbie Andrew joining us here from the Gainesville Sun, Gatorsports.com, covering Florida, who comes in off of the season that they had, of course, replaced with Dan Mullen. You mentioned the talent around the quarterback position on offense. Who were you seeing as the major star players kind of stepping up and trying to fill that void that might be not vacated by the quarterback position, but at least trying to lift that quarterback position up?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the running back spot. Jordan Scarlett missed all of last year. He was suspended because of the credit card fraud thing. But, at the end of the previous year, he had taken over the starting role and was starting to emerge as an elite back. I mean, he looked really good at the end of the year and, had a great summer, was ready to go. And then the week before the opener, he got suspended and was done. So if he can get back to the form he had, I think they're going to be really good at the starting running back. And they've got some really talented guys behind them that did things last year, like Malik Davis and LaMichael Pirine. So they've got talent there, no question about it. It's just a matter of, whether Scarlett can knock all the way off and regain the form he had when he got suspended. And then the other playmakers I see are, tight ends. Keontae Lewis, had a good spring. He is a receiving tight end. And then the two transfer receivers, Trevon Grimes and Van Jefferson, if they're ruled eligible, I think they're going to make an immediate impact in the passing game.
I get the feeling just from watching from afar, before he, let me put it as politely as possible, put his foot in his mouth, it never seemed that Jim McElwain was a fit at Florida. Even when he won the 2 division titles, there was something not there. Dan Mullen returning. Of course, the glory years at Florida under Urban Meyer, he was offensive coordinator, but there was always a feeling at some in Gator Nation, well, Dan Mullen acts like he knows too much. I'm not sure we want him back here. Gator Nation itself, Dan Mullen back at Florida, has he been totally accepted?
Well, I think, based on his spring speaking tour, he's been embraced by the fan base because, you mentioned Coach Mack, and I agree. I don't think he ever fit here, and I don't think he ever felt that comfortable here. And there were times last year during the year, or even early in the year, some of his press conferences, members of the media would say, what's wrong with this guy? He seems like he is down, despondent, doesn't want to be here. And, I don't think he ever fully embraced, what he had here and whether he was real comfortable here. And then, you look at Dan Mullen, he's a guy that, won 2 national championships here. He got married here, had a family here, and, the opportunity to come back. He knows what Florida football is about. He knows how to win here and what it takes. And, he understands the fan base. And I don't think Jim McElwain did at all. And I think that, there has been a reconnect between the head ball coach here, now Mullen, and the fans. So, he's got to win games. But I think right now the fans are glad he's back, and he's definitely expressed strong feelings for being back.
They have winnable games up front. Tennessee on the road should be a victory. Obviously, the return engagement in Mississippi State offers a lot of intrigue, but then you hit the LSU game in October, obviously the cocktail party at the end of October, and then South Carolina in November. Where do you think the Gators' ceiling is? And if anything, what do you think is the floor?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say just because we don't know who the quarterback is, how he's going to play, and that's going to determine a lot in terms of what their record is. But, a lot of people are saying they could win 8, maybe 9 games. And, I could see that happening if, the skill players make plays and the quarterback, takes care of the ball and manages the offense. I think they could win 8 or 9 games. And you look at the schedule, I think that is doable. But then you look at last year, 4-7, who knows? I mean, if you get injuries and the quarterback sticks again, then, I don't know what the ground level is on that one.
Robbie Andrew covering the Gators for the Gainesville Sun and Gatorsports.com. We'll see you next week in Atlanta, Robbie. Thanks so much.
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot.
That's Robbie Andrew joining us here on Sports Talk, South Carolina Radio Network. Are you convinced? 'Cause I'm not.
No, I was under the impression that Dan Mullen would be accepted because the previous coach was unacceptable.
Yes.
And
well,
so,
I think they would have taken anybody who is a competent body over the man that they got rid of.
And of course,
and Dan Mullen is competent. I'm not saying Dan Mullen's not a good coach or that he's not competent. I'm just saying he's not Jesus of Nazareth. He can't make this group that was 4-7 last year a 10-win team in my mind.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I think in the state of Florida, a school like Florida, it's got to be 2, 3, maybe even 4-year rebuild.
And that might turn some people there off because they want success and they want it now. Thank you.
More of your calls are coming up on Sports Talk. Hit us up at 800-956-7266.
Sports Talk South Carolina Radio Network. It's time for the Mike Morgan Report. Morgan on the Move, which is brought to you by Founders Federal Credit Union. Their mortgage team is more equipped than ever to help you with the mortgage process, with the buying or refinancing. Visit foundersfcu.com/mortgage to apply today. And by BP Skinner Clothing, people nationwide get their custom-made suits and accessories from Brent Skinner, the best in suits, shirts, pants, shoes, and more, available to you in Columbia, in the Vista. No matter where you are, Brent will come to you as well. Visit bpskinnerclothiers.com to set up an appointment. So, Mike, we just got done talking about the one school that we all as a group talked about last week, and that was Florida, about how they're getting, in my mind and in the minds of at least I think those of us who all sit in this room, a little bit too much love. They seem to still think that there's optimism for a potential turnaround. How long do you think Florida's turnaround will take to where they're fully at full strength?
Well, I think the answer to that is predicated in the majority by the fact that they're just going to have to find a quarterback, and I'm not convinced Felipe Franks is that guy. I have no doubt Dan Mullen will get talent to Gainesville. Some might say that the last couple of coaches got talent there, even though they didn't have a great win-loss percentage, at least not by Florida standards. But when Dan gets the right guy in place, I do think Florida will be somewhere in between what it was under Urban Meyer with 2 national championships versus what it was under Will Muschamp and Coach McElwain, which of course was far below the mark. So I think somewhere in the middle is that sweet spot. I think Dan Mullen will have them there. I don't know if it's going to happen there this year. I think next week when everybody convenes and puts together a vote on the Eastern Division standings, it's no surprise Georgia's going to be the overwhelming favorite. And then the Florida-South Carolina vote, I think, will be one of the tougher ones that people have to make. And again, it's not so much the South Carolina media and the Florida media what they're going to pick. I'm curious what everybody else is going to pick. The people that are not so close to those particular programs and have more of a macro view of it. Who do they think is the better team right now? For me, based on what you have with Bentley returning at quarterback versus what you have at Florida, which is a big question mark, the temptation is to go with Carolina. The fact that the game is in Gainesville, I think the people that actually take some time to bother to look at the schedule, that will sway their vote one way or another. But I think that's clearly one of the more intriguing votes is who gets second place versus third in the Eastern Division.
As Steve Spurrier called it, it's talking season, and it always it always culminates with SEC media days as far as the SEC is concerned. And Mike, am I whistling in the dark and thinking that this media day extravaganza can take on even a higher step because it's now, at least for this next time out in Atlanta?
Well, I think, first of all, I think everybody wants it in Atlanta, with the exception of the people that reside in Birmingham. Really, this is where I think most of us feel it belongs. The College Football Hall of Fame, for those that have not been, it's an outstanding venue just for anything. First of all, it's a great place to go just to check out. There are many exhibits and displays. I don't get a dime for saying that. It's just true. And secondly, they've now gotten into the business of hosting a lot of these type of events, and it's the perfect venue as opposed to a hotel with a hallway to a shopping mall. When I think about it, it kind of makes me chuckle. But I think it's a bigger stage. ESPN and the SEC network will be putting together unmatched coverage, unprecedented coverage. And I think you'll see maybe a little less of Alabama fans waiting for a Nick Saban autograph and more just fans of college football and maybe perhaps even more national media members making the trip to Atlanta, which is easy to get to, and covering the event. So, yeah, I hope this is a landmark year and a trend-setting year, but nothing has been set in stone as opposed to where this will be held in the future.
You know, Mike, we were looking at who's been invited by their specific coaching staffs and athletic directors to come, talking about the players, that is. And we noticed that the schools, including the reigning national champion, if there's any question about who the quarterback is, they're not inviting a quarterback to come, including Alabama. You put any feeling into that, why Alabama wouldn't at least have one of their quarterbacks there?
Because they don't want to deal with it. Look, Tua is going to be the guy, and until he fails, Tua is number one and Jalen's number two. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen winds up being a transfer at some point. I just think Tua is a more talented quarterback, and I like Jalen Hurts. So this is not me banging on Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen actually did a lot of good things based on what he was asked to do. But Tua is just a different level of passer and a different level of playmaker. And oh, by the way, he's the hero of the national championship. So when you add all that up, I think that's going to be the guy. Nick Saban is going to be asked basically one legitimate question, and that's going to be the quarterback race, and he's going to deflect it. And the rest of the time, it's going to be silliness, like so many of the questions at SEC Media Days are every year. At the end of the day, we're not really solving anything. We're not breaking much news when it comes to SEC Media Days. I've been to 15 of them, and honestly, you don't learn a lot about anybody from it. It just gives us an excuse to talk SEC football. From that standpoint, it's a win. From everything else, it's a whole lot of sound and fury that signifies not much of anything in the way of hard news.
A lot of hot air, I would say.
A ton of hot air.
Well, I will just because you dropped the bomb there with the Tua proclamation. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I mean, Tua has a skin on the wall from the national championship game. What are your thoughts about, the two hot freshmen who sit here in this region with Georgia's Justin Fields and, of course, Clemson's Trevor Lawrence? How do you handicap their ability to supplant the starting jobs by the end of the season?
Well, I'm a little closer to the Georgia one right now, although I would certainly give the incumbent the edge at Clemson as well. But in the Georgia case, I'd be shocked, and I mean really shocked, if Jake Fromm at any point this season lost his starting job unless it was an injury. There's nothing not to like about that kid in terms of results, in terms of leadership, in terms of intangibles. I realize it's a stud recruit. It won't be the last stud recruit quarterback to go to Georgia. But I just don't see this year from relinquishing that spot. There's just too many good things that he has going for him. And so if another kid comes in and maybe he runs 0.2 of a second faster on his 40 or throws the ball 5 yards farther down the field in a workout, that's not enough to convince me that he's the better choice for quarterback. I think Jake Fromm did everything you asked him to and won a lot of big games and was clutch. Based on that, to me, he's the guy.
Who are you most looking forward to hearing from next week?
Well, if you want to just have pure entertainment value, Ed Orgeron is always, just his accent and everything else, combined with the fact that I think most people view him on maybe the hottest of coaching seats in this league. I don't think 8-4 is good enough at LSU, and I don't think even LSU fans, they love the fact he's a Louisiana guy and he speaks their language and eats the same food. Walks the same way, talks the same. All that's great, but that Les Miles got fired despite the fact he was a really likable guy and he was winning 10 games a year and won a national championship. So that gives you an idea what the expectations are in Baton Rouge. And I don't know if I've never been sold on that Orgeron. I like him. I think he's fun. I wish him well, but I would not be surprised if there might be a couple of somewhat hardball questions asked of him, and I'll be very curious to see how he answers it. Other than that, in terms of pure entertainment value, we don't have a whole lot of Steve Spurriers anymore. We don't have a lot of overwhelming personalities.
Okay, you got 10 seconds. What pitcher is the Braves going to trade for?
Oh, jeez. I'm going to need more than 10 on that, bro, but I don't think they're getting a huge name. I'll put it that way.
Well, you'll have the pleasure of Korn's company as opposed to mine in Atlanta, but wish you and yours the best of luck and best of times in Atlanta. And we'll talk to you next week.
Okay, guys, be good.
Money coach Fran Halloran comes your way next on Sports Talk. Sports Talk South Carolina Radio now brought to you by Founders Federal Credit Union. Hey guys, this is big. For a limited time, Founders Federal Credit Union's 5-year certificate is at its highest rate. Don't miss your chance. Visit foundersfcu.com or your local office to apply. It is with that vein, we welcome in the money coach, Fran Halloran, for his weekly visit with us here on Sports Talk. I'm understanding, Coach, that we have quite the earning potential for the Nike swoosh when the World Cup final comes your way this weekend.
Good evening, Will. Good evening, Pro. Hope you're both doing very well, and you're getting by without your good buddy Corn.
We are thriving.
So,
we're thriving.
Hey, listen, I heard you last night talking about going stir crazy, though, because the old gray-headed or bald-headed Cornblute isn't around. So you got to miss him a little bit, I would imagine.
We're excited to get the gang back together next week.
I hear you. So I'm not a huge soccer fan. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against the sport. I played the sport as a kid, played the sport through middle school, but I'm not a huge fan of the World Cup. Just not. I guess if America was in it, I'd be rooting for I'd be rooting for the home team. But, the idea of France and Croatia, sorry, but I'm not interested. But I got to be honest, the rest of the world is. Let me put this in perspective. Do y'all have any idea how many people watched the Super Bowl last year? The Eagles and the Patriots. Anybody got an idea of the number of people who watched the Super Bowl last year?
I would say in the upwards of a couple 100 million.
111.3 million people watched the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know how many people watched the 2014 FIFA World Cup final? Just the one game, the final game of the World Cup in 2014.
I'd say
how many people do you think watched it?
I'd say probably triple that.
1 billion people.
Okay, maybe 10 times that.
10 times that watched the FIFA World Cup final in 2014. 1 billion people. Not to mention the fact that during the tournament, 3.2 billion people watched that tournament. Those numbers are staggering. Absolutely staggering.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So here's what I want you to do now, because for the first time ever in a final, Nike is outfitting both teams with the kit. Now, I think that's the stupidest word I've ever heard for, the uniform. But the kit is the socks, the shorts, the shirt. Nike swoosh is going to be on both France and Croatia's clothing. And they're going to be exposing that swoosh to 1 billion people during that game, maybe even more. And here's the numbers. Here are the numbers that are really staggering for me. Let's just say that 5% of the people watching that game decide to buy, I don't know, a jersey, a pair of shoes, a pair of shorts, or maybe a couple of items to the tune of about $100. So it's only 5% of that billion, or 50 million people. 50 million people. That's only 5%. If only 5% of the people watching that game decide to spend $100 on some kind of Nike garb, that is a $5 billion payday for Nike.
It's nuts. That's very nuts.
$5 billion. So it's no wonder that Nike doesn't have a problem paying a college or a pro team $30 million over 6 years or $50 million over 10 years, because one big time game like this for the World Cup, and Nike stands to gain billions and billions of dollars. And if I'm half wrong, and only 2.5% of the people watching the FIFA World Cup final buy something or spend $100, it's still $2.5 billion for Nike. Those numbers are staggering. I would argue that is proof that even though I'm not a big soccer fan, soccer is by far and away the most popular sport in the world, bar none.
It has
no one is watching to the tune of 1 billion people.
Yeah, it captures the passion of pretty much most of the world. And the key point is, and I want to compare it to something where some our listeners can understand, is that, when we think about back in the 60s and 70s, the passion that America had and other of Western nations had against the communists when we went to the Olympics. It was almost it was it was like a war with balls and sneakers. It wasn't like and there was an extra passion in it because you had your country's colors on. Something you can't capture with a pro league or even a college league. And we see that there are nationalities all over the world who switch back to their colors of their native land if they live in some other country, and for that moment they are capturing the passion of their homelands, and it seems that they've done it with World Cup.
Well, you're right, Pro. Case in point, there are restaurants and bars all over the United States that have had weeks like no others because immigrants from other countries who live in America are showing up every night to drink a pint of beer and watch the World Cup. And it is so foreign to me. I just cannot imagine wanting to do that. But the numbers don't lie. Numbers never do. It's that big a deal to everyone else in the world. It may not be a huge deal to those of us in America who live on, football, baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet. But it is a huge deal to the rest of the world as we know it. And Nike, give them their credit. They are all over the place, and they have the opportunity to have this kind of exposure for the first time ever. This is not, I take that back. I think it's been 30 years since one apparel company has outfitted both teams with the kit, so to speak, for the World Cup final. So this is big for Nike. Cannot deny that. It's no wonder they're the leader when it comes to apparel in the world.
So
those are big numbers.
The fine folks at FanDuel have decided to expand their efforts for legal gambling to the swamps of the New Jersey Meadowlands. They're going to put a sports book at the Meadowlands racetrack. You can bet that there might be some crossover with fans who attend games at Giants Stadium, MetLife Stadium there. Obviously, some details need to be worked out before the NFL season, but this is big, big news. And again, a burgeoning business as we get closer and closer to the NFL season.
It's going to be, to borrow from President Trump's favorite word, it's going to be huge. And it really is going to be big because now you don't have to go to your bookie. You can go right up to the betting window in an NFL stadium at the Meadowlands and place
adjacent to the NFL stadium. Let's clarify. Adjacent to the NFL stadium.
That's the first step, is to be adjacent. But everything I've read says that before it's over with, we're going to see these betting booths, if you will, inside these stadiums. It's only a matter of time. And that to me really screams for the possibility of massive corruption. And I'm just not comfortable with it. And I think it's hypocritical of the NFL after all the years they've spent talking about how betting and pro sports is not something that should go hand in hand. Now they want a piece of the pie. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Hypocrisy is its best. But it just goes to show money is the driving force for almost everything in this world, including the NFL.
Real quick, plug your biz.
888-779-2557, Higgins and Halloran Financial. We're here to help you get intentional with your financial plan. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great evening and a nice weekend.
That's Fran Halloran, the money coach, usually with us. We got another person who actually replied to us and said Clemson's turning into Alabama because they're not playing a game outside the state of South Carolina. It's a basketball tweet. It's basketball. Gosh, darn it.
Let's call it soccer. Thank you.
Now back to Sports Talk, South Carolina's most listened to sports talk show for more than 30 years.
I swear to goodness gracious, I'm taking a big Twitter break when I go on vacation here in a couple of weeks. My last little salvo before the end of the year. Oh my goodness gracious! I'm
we getting mixed up with football and basketball again.
Jesus! Oh man, it's crazy. Hey. But you know, it is what it is. I probably should have put football or put basketball in the tweet, but again, we were very much talking about the basketball.
Okay.
Again, whatever. It's fine. I'm just going to sit here and mind my own business. The John Deere Classic going on in Illinois. Steve Wheatcroft, 9 under par, 62. He shoots today in the Quad Cities. Scott Brown, local import, tied for 7th, 3 shots back at 6 under. Billy Haas shot 69 today. Nice, -2. Tommy Gainey, -1. William McGirt and Wesley Bryan each were even par. Jonathan Bird, Sam Saunders each 1 over for the day. Kyle Stanley at +3. Atlanta's Freddie Freeman will represent the Atlanta Braves in the Home Run Derby. Intrigued? You going to watch?
Probably not.
You're not a Home Run Derby guy.
Well, the Home Run Derby for me can get a little bit exciting as they get to the final 2. Here's the problem I have with the Home Run Derby.
I'm ready.
I'm thinking that, and there's a lot of solid players participating this year, but you get the feeling that psychologically, maybe it's an undercurrent, that those guys start to get the home run swing that they have to work their way out of once they get back into regular play.
Oh, yeah.
And so
happened to David Wright of the Mets. He had a 27 home run first half when he went for the Home Run Derby in Pittsburgh, and he had 2 after the All-Star break that year.
Yeah, because
the
it's the same as the disease people used to talk about when a right-handed batter, especially from the National League, makes his first appearance in Fenway Park and sees that inviting green monster, and he wants to pull everything from now to kingdom come after seeing that green monster.
I'll be watching. He's paired with Bryce Harper,
the hometown hero.
Part of the reason I'll be watching is because, again, next week we are in the vast wasteland of time. Although, actually, I'll be driving back from I'll be licking my wounds from reserve at Lake Kiowee and trying to pack for Charlotte for that. So who knows? Maybe I'll flip it on. That's probably a bad radio sport, just because the fact that they do all it's because it's a speed competition now. I will watch the Legends and Celebrity softball game though. That is my favorite of the Major League Baseball All-Star events. I'm very curious to see how that goes, just because that's always a fun event for yours truly to put in. This was interesting, and this kind of has you in mind. Remember when Arthur Blank and the Atlanta Falcons made very big headlines about how they were going to make sure that their brand new concessions at the new stadium were going to be cheaper and more affordable for fans? Well, Mississippi State has taken notice. They are reducing most of their prices all across the board. A bottled soda at Mississippi State in Stark Vegas is going to be $2, down from $4. The 22-ounce fountain drink will be $3, down from $5 a year ago. A 44-ounce Super Stadium cup will be just $4. Bottled water will be $2. Popcorn box will be $2. Hot dog, $2. Nacho tray, $2. And a Little Caesars pizza will be $6. So there you go. We're now getting economical. They're seeing that fans would rather sit outside. They're starting to try and maybe, say, hey, come back. A little bit of a marketing tool.
And maybe it's a guilt feeling that they're being gouged with the higher price of the tickets. Once they see all, especially here's the key. If you're a fan and you happen to be a fan of an SEC school and you see the payout from the SEC network every year and you say, well, wait a minute. Why is my tickets going higher? Why are the concessions higher? People start to think. And then, of course, we're seeing some, I guess, some of the fans staying at home because they have the comfort of the living room and the clicker and everything is right there in the refrigerator, and many people are staying home. So maybe anything to please the fans, including better Wi-Fi and
or if like in
Oklahoma
State where they're selling beer now, and how long before Oklahoma now follows suit because of the fact that you got to keep up with the Joneses there in the Sooner State.
T. Boone Pickens has to have his beer when he's in his luxury box.
Oh, you thought T. Boone is not a beer guy. I know T. Boone is a very, very high exclusive bourbon guy. He is a bourbon guy.
Hey, he looks like a bourbon guy.
He is not a beer guy. T. Boone, I would venture to say the last beer T. Boone Pickens had was when he had dark hair.
He doesn't even take the Boilermaker.
I don't even know if he does that.
Oh,
okay. I think he gets right to the business of the matter, if you will. We got a couple of tweets in on our topic earlier about Danny Sheridan saying that South Carolina was only going to win seven games this season. This is from Leon. I've been to many USC versus Georgia games, and the one and only thing I know for sure, it's always a trench fight. The underdog is always in the game. Don't bet against the Gamecocks at home. Neil, who's a Tiger fan, says Danny Sheridan was spot on unless you live in that bubble of Columbia. So transitioning and contrasting viewpoints, which I find interesting because again, it's weird. So much of the way people perceive people, again, like we've been saying all week, it's part of the, it's part of the condition of our brain. Like we're conditioned to seeing things, conditioned to seeing 7, 8, 9 victories maybe 9 every once in a while. In my mind, I think this stands to be a very big turnaround season for South Carolina, and I think the schedule stacks up favorably because of that.
Well, the key point is, I think a lot of people, Danny Sheridan may be one of them. First of all, again, there are schools that are ordained to win, and South Carolina happens to be one that they think can't. Also, the level of respect or lack of same for Will Muschamp as a football coach, because they can't figure it out. If this guy can't do it at Florida, why in the world is he recruiting these players? And he comes and takes over a team that wins 3 games, wins 6, and then that turns to 9. Half his offensive line is hurt. His best offensive player, arguably, and Deebo Samuel's gone, and the sucker wins 9 games. But still, we can't give him credit for being a good coach because he didn't do it at Florida.
Well, I still think Jake Bentley has to take a significant step forward. In my mind, that's in my mind, I think the one thing. So if we're thinking about where South Carolina's ceiling is, it's the kind of year that has Jake Bentley on Heisman Trophy watch lists. Like that's the kind of season he has to have in order for me to be considering that the Gamecocks are in a year where they're being talked about as a potential, trip to Atlanta. That has to happen.
Is he a Heisman Trophy candidate if you have a defensive-minded coach? I'm just asking you because Heisman Trophy quarterbacks are predicated on the coaching staff asking the quarterback to win football games.
Right.
And whereas somebody throws another touchdown pass, Will Muschamp, we're running clock.
Well,
we're keeping the defense off the field.
Well,
this is what we're going to do.
Tua Tagovailoa and Trevor Lawrence, who combined have only one half of college football experience between the two of them, and Tua has that. They're both the tied for 3rd shortest odds in Las Vegas for the Heisman Trophy winner. So, and by the way, we don't know if one of those guys is going to be the starting quarterback or both of them.
Yeah, but that's because they play for 2 ordained teams.
Or the ordained teams.
Yeah.
Kelly Bryant plus 2,000 if you want him for Heisman Trophy winning, possibly if you want that.
Now that's cold-blooded. That's cold-blooded.
We're back tomorrow. We'll do some more. We're going to talk to Peter Burns of the SEC Network tomorrow. A little preview of what we'll see next week in Atlanta. Also, we'll do the golf and the NASCAR with George Bryan and Monty Dutton. See you tomorrow.